Long, long ago, even before stories were written down, people lived in the land we now call China. Archaeologists, who are kind of like detectives of the past, have found the bones of very early humans such as Peking man, who lived there hundreds of thousands of years ago. These early people learned how to use fire, make simple stone tools, and hunt for food. Over thousands of years they started to form small villages, especially along the fertile banks of the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. These rivers provided water for drinking and for growing crops, which was, honestly, a huge step for humanity. They learned to farm millet in the north and rice in the south, which meant they could stay in one place and build communities. These early communities grew into cultures with their own special ways of life. For example, the Yangshao culture, which existed around 5000 to 3000 BCE, is famous for its beautiful painted pottery. They decorated their clay pots with amazing designs of fish, faces, and geometric patterns. Another important group was the Longshan culture, known for their shiny black pottery that was very thin and elegant, almost like an eggshell. These ancient people were not just surviving, they were creating art and developing complex societies. They laid the very first stones for the great civilization that would later become China, building a foundation of community, agriculture, and craftsmanship that would last for millennia. As people began to tell stories to explain the world around them, they created powerful myths about the beginnings of their civilization. These tales were not written down at first but were passed from parents to children through spoken words for many generations. These legends tell of wise and heroic rulers who taught people essential skills. One of the most famous figures is Pangu, a giant who was said to have created the entire universe. The story goes that he emerged from a giant egg of chaos. When he died, his body parts became the earth, the sky, the sun, the moon, and all the things we see in nature. Other important legendary figures were the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, who were godlike kings. They were said to have invented very important things for human life. For instance, Fuxi taught people how to fish with nets and raise animals. Shennong, the divine farmer, introduced agriculture and medicine by tasting hundreds of herbs to see which were helpful and which were poisonous. The most famous of the 5 emperors was the Yellow Emperor, or Huangdi. He is considered the ancestor of all Han Chinese people. He fought great battles and brought different tribes together, setting the stage for the very first dynasty and a unified Chinese culture. Following the Age of Legends, China entered the time of its first dynasties. A dynasty is a period when a country is ruled by members of the same family. The very first dynasty, according to ancient stories, was the Xia dynasty. It was said to have been founded by a great hero named Yu the Great. The stories tell of a terrible, long-lasting flood that covered the land. Yu worked for 13 years to control the floodwaters, digging channels to guide the water to the sea. He was so dedicated that he passed by his own home 3 times without stopping to go inside. Because of his amazing work, the people made him their king, and he established the Xia dynasty, passing his rule to his son and starting the tradition of hereditary rule. For a long time, historians were not sure if the Xia dynasty was real or just a myth, because there were no written records from that time. However, in recent decades, archaeologists have uncovered evidence that makes the story more believable. They have found the remains of a large ancient city at a site called Erlitou. This site has palace-like buildings, workshops for making bronze tools, and tombs that suggest a complex and organized society. While we still don't have definitive proof that this was the capital of the Xia, these discoveries show that a powerful state existed in the Yellow River Valley during the time the legends describe, making the stories of Yu the Great and the Xia feel much closer to history. After the Xia, the Shang dynasty rose to power around 1600 BCE. The Shang is the first dynasty for which we have clear written evidence, so we know for sure that it existed. The most amazing evidence comes from what we call oracle bones. These were turtle shells and animal bones that the Shang kings used to ask questions to the gods or their ancestors. A priest would carve a question onto the bone like, "Will we win the next battle? Or will the harvest be good?" Then they would heat the bone until it cracked. The king or a diviner would read the cracks to find the answer. These questions and sometimes the answers were inscribed on the bones, giving us the earliest examples of Chinese writing. The Shang dynasty was also a time of incredible artistic and technological achievement, especially in working with bronze. Shang craftsmen created magnificent bronze containers for rituals to honor their ancestors. These vessels were decorated with intricate patterns, often featuring a mythical animal face called A. Making these bronze objects required a lot of skill and organization. It meant they had to mine copper and tin, transport them, and have workshops with many skilled workers. The power of the Shang kings was clearly shown through these beautiful bronze treasures and their control over the precious oracle bones which connected them to the spirit world. Around 1046 BCE, a new dynasty called the Zhou overthrew the Shang. The Zhou dynasty was the longest-lasting dynasty in all of Chinese history, ruling for nearly 800 years. To explain why they had the right to rule, the Zhou kings introduced a very important idea called the Mandate of Heaven. This concept stated that heaven, a divine force, granted the emperor the right to rule. However, this right was not permanent. If a ruler became wicked, corrupt, or incompetent, heaven would show its displeasure through natural disasters like floods or earthquakes. When that happened, the people had the right to rebel and support a new, more worthy ruler. This idea would shape Chinese politics for thousands of years to come. The early part of the Zhou dynasty, known as the Western Zhou, was a time of relative peace and stability. Society was organized using a system similar to European feudalism. The king gave large pieces of land to his relatives and loyal nobles. In return, these lords had to be loyal to the king, provide him with soldiers in times of war, and pay him taxes or tributes. This system worked well for a while, helping the king control a vast territory. However, over time, the lords in charge of their own lands grew more powerful and independent. They started to think of their lands as their own little kingdoms, which eventually weakened the power of the Zhou king. Eventually, in 771 BCE, invaders from the west attacked the Zhou capital, forcing the royal family to flee eastward. This marked the beginning of the Eastern Zhou period, a time when the king's power was much weaker. The lords no longer obeyed him and instead began fighting among themselves for more land and power. This era is divided into two parts, the Spring and Autumn period and the Warring States period. It was a time of constant warfare and political chaos. States swallowed up other states, and military strategy became very important. Despite the violence, this instability led to one of the most incredible periods of intellectual creativity in China's history. This chaotic time is often called the 100 Schools of Thought because many different thinkers and philosophers came up with ideas about how to create a better government and a more peaceful society. The most famous of these was Confucius, who taught that society would be orderly if everyone behaved according to their role and showed respect, especially children to their parents and subjects to their ruler. Another school of thought was Taoism, which taught people to live in harmony with the Tao or the Way, a natural force that guides the universe. A third philosophy, legalism, argued that people were naturally selfish and needed strict laws and harsh punishments to keep them in line. These ideas would profoundly influence China for centuries. After centuries of division during the Warring States period, one state, the Qin, finally emerged victorious. Its ruthless and ambitious king Ying Zheng conquered all the other states and, in 221 BCE, unified China for the first time. He gave himself a new, grander title, Qin Shi Huang, which means First Emperor of Qin. To ensure China would never be divided again, he created a strong central government. He abolished the old feudal system and divided the country into 36 districts, each run by officials he appointed directly. This meant that all power flowed from him, the emperor, creating a model for how China would be governed for the next 2,000 years. The first emperor was a man of immense vision and brutality. He standardized everything across his vast empire to make it easier to rule. He ordered that everyone use the same system of writing, the same coins for money, and the same units for measuring weight and length, including the width of roads for carts. He also ordered the construction of massive projects. To protect China from nomadic tribes in the north, he commanded that the separate walls built by earlier states be connected, forming the first version of the Great Wall. To prepare for his own death, he built a gigantic tomb for himself, famously guarded by thousands of life-size terracotta warriors, each with a unique face. Despite his incredible achievements in unifying China, Qin Shi Huang was a tyrannical ruler. He followed the philosophy of legalism, which believed in absolute control and harsh punishments. He suppressed all other ideas, most famously ordering the burning of books from other philosophical schools and even executing scholars who disagreed with him. This cruelty made him many enemies. His dynasty did not last long after his death. The people, tired of the heavy taxes, forced labor and brutal laws, rose up in rebellion. The mighty Qin dynasty, which was supposed to last for 10,000 generations, collapsed just 15 years after it was founded, a powerful lesson about the limits of force. Out of the chaos that followed the fall of the Qin, a new dynasty emerged, the Han dynasty, founded by a commoner turned rebel leader named Liu Bang. The Han dynasty would rule for over 400 years, and is considered one of China's greatest golden ages. So much so, that the main ethnic group in China today is called the Han Chinese. The Han rulers learned from the mistakes of the Qin. They kept the Qin's centralized government, but governed with a softer touch. They made Confucianism the official philosophy of the state. This meant that government officials were chosen based on their education and moral character, not just their family connections, creating a more stable and effective administration. After about 4 centuries of glory, the Han dynasty eventually weakened. Powerful landowners, court eunuchs, and members of the empress's family fought for control, and well, this caused the central government to crumble. This led to a period of instability and widespread rebellion. In the year 220 CE, the last Han emperor was forced to give up his throne, and China splintered into 3 separate states: Wei in the north, Shu in the southwest, and Wu in the southeast. This began the famous Three Kingdoms period, which honestly was an era of constant warfare and brilliant military strategy. It was a time of legendary heroes like Cao Cao, Liu Bei, and Sun Quan, whose stories of loyalty, ambition, and betrayal were later immortalized in the famous novel. The fighting between the Three Kingdoms lasted for decades, causing immense suffering for the common people. Although the Jin dynasty briefly reunified China around the year 280 CE, this peace did not last long. Invasions by non-Han peoples from the north soon shattered the empire once again. China was split into 2 parts, a series of short-lived kingdoms in the north ruled by these invaders, and a series of 4 dynasties that continued Han traditions in the south. This long and chaotic period, lasting from the fall of the Han to the late 6th century, is known as the period of the Northern and Southern dynasties. It was a dark and difficult time in many ways, marked by political division and social upheaval. But despite the constant warfare and instability, this era was also a time of significant cultural change and development. As people faced hardship and uncertainty, many turned away from Confucianism, which seemed unable to provide answers for such troubled times. Instead, a new religion that had come from India via the Silk Road began to spread rapidly: Buddhism. Buddhism offered a message of personal salvation and relief from suffering through spiritual enlightenment. Its teachings on karma and rebirth provided comfort and hope to people from all social classes, from emperors to peasants. Monasteries were built across the land, and Buddhist art, with its beautiful statues and cave paintings, really flourished. This period of division finally came to an end in the year 589 CE, when a general from the north named Yang Jian conquered the south and reunified the country, establishing the Sui dynasty. Although the Sui dynasty was very short-lived, lasting only 37 years, it played a crucial role in setting the stage for another great golden age. The Sui emperors re-centralized the government, rebuilt the Great Wall, and undertook one of the most impressive engineering projects in history: the construction of the Grand Canal. This massive waterway linked the rice-producing region of the Yangtze River in the south with the political center in the north, ensuring a steady supply of food and uniting the country economically. Building on the foundations laid by the Sui, the Tang dynasty, which lasted from 618 to 907 CE, really ushered in what is often considered the most brilliant golden age of Chinese civilization. The Tang capital, Chang'an, which is now modern-day Xi'an, was actually the largest and most cosmopolitan city in the world at the time. It was a vibrant hub of culture and trade, welcoming merchants, diplomats, and religious pilgrims from all over Asia and beyond. The Tang dynasty was a time of great confidence and openness to foreign ideas. New forms of music, dance, and fashion arrived from Central Asia and Persia, while Chinese culture, in turn, spread its influence to neighboring countries like Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. Tang society was, honestly, remarkably advanced and prosperous. The government was run by a complex bureaucracy of scholar officials who had to pass these really rigorous civil service examinations based on the Confucian classics. This system ensured that talented and educated men, not just aristocrats, could serve in government. The economy thrived, supported by the efficient transport of grain on the Grand Canal and the bustling trade along the Silk Road. It was also a golden age for the arts, especially poetry. Poets like Li Bai and Du Fu wrote some of the most beautiful and enduring poems in the Chinese language, capturing the joys, sorrows, and grandeur of their era. However, like all great dynasties, the Tang began to decline. A devastating rebellion led by a general named An Lushan in the mid-8th century shattered the peace and prosperity of the empire. Although the rebellion was eventually put down, the Tang government never fully recovered its authority. Regional military governors became too powerful, and the central government lost control over the country. After a long period of decay, the Tang dynasty officially ended in 907 CE. China then entered another period of disunity, known as the Five Dynasties and Ten Kingdoms period, which was a chaotic half-century of warfare as different warlords fought for control. Out of this chaos, the Song dynasty, from 960 to 1279 CE, emerged to reunite most of China. The Song is often seen as another high point in Chinese history, particularly in terms of economic and technological innovation. It was a time of great commercial expansion, with a bustling market economy and the world's first government-issued paper money. Song inventors came up with some of the most important inventions in history, including gunpowder, which they used for fireworks and simple weapons, the magnetic compass, which revolutionized navigation at sea, and movable type printing, which made books much cheaper and more widely available, leading to a surge in literacy and education. The technological and cultural brilliance of the Song dynasty could not save it from powerful invaders from the north. In the 13th century, the Mongols, a group of nomadic warriors united by the legendary Genghis Khan, began their conquest of Asia. His grandson Kublai Khan completed the conquest of China, defeating the last of the Song forces in 1279. For the first time, all of China was ruled by a foreign people. Kublai Khan established a new dynasty which he called the Yuan dynasty. He made his capital at Dadu, which is now the modern city of Beijing. The Mongols ruled a vast empire that stretched all the way to Europe, which made trade and travel across Asia safer than ever before. Under Mongol rule, China was part of a huge international network. Foreigners, such as the famous Venetian merchant Marco Polo, were welcome at the Yuan court and were sometimes given positions in the government. This was because the Mongols did not fully trust the Han Chinese scholar officials. This period saw increased contact between China and the rest of the world, leading to an exchange of ideas, technologies, and goods. However, many Han Chinese resented being ruled by foreigners. The Mongols imposed a strict social hierarchy that placed themselves at the top and the southern Chinese at the very bottom, causing a great deal of tension and unhappiness. The Yuan dynasty did not last long. A combination of factors, including internal power struggles among the Mongol princes, natural disasters, and widespread peasant rebellions fueled by anti-Mongol sentiment, weakened their rule. One of the rebel leaders was a poor peasant named Zhu Yuanzhang. He proved to be a brilliant military commander and successfully drove the Mongols out of China. In 1368, he captured the capital, Dadu, and declared the founding of a new dynasty, the Ming dynasty. The Ming dynasty would rule China for nearly 300 years, and its name, which means bright, symbolized the return of Han Chinese rule after a century of foreign domination. The Ming dynasty began as a time of renewed confidence and great projects. The early Ming emperors rebuilt the economy and re-established the traditional Confucian state and civil service examination system. One of the most remarkable episodes of this era was the series of 7 massive maritime expeditions led by the Admiral Zheng He in the early 15th century. His enormous treasure ships sailed all the way to the coast of Africa, long before European explorers reached those waters. These voyages were designed to display China's power and collect tribute from other nations. However, after these expeditions, the Ming emperors turned inward, focusing on strengthening the Great Wall to defend against the Mongols and limiting contact with the outside world. By the early 17th century, the Ming dynasty was in decline. A combination of weak emperors, government corruption, and economic hardship led to widespread rebellions. At the same time, another powerful group of people, the Manchus, were rising to power in the northeast, beyond the Great Wall. In 1644, when a rebel army captured the Ming capital of Beijing, Manchu forces swept in, defeated the rebels, and took control of China for themselves. They established the Qing dynasty, which would be the last imperial dynasty to rule China. Like the Mongols, the Manchus were foreign rulers, and they forced Han Chinese men to wear their hair in a specific style, shaved in the front with a long braid in the back called a queue, as a sign of submission. For its first 150 years, the Qing dynasty was strong and prosperous. Under powerful emperors like Kangxi and Qianlong, the empire expanded to its greatest size, incorporating territories like Taiwan, Tibet, and Xinjiang. This period was a time of relative peace and stability, leading to a massive increase in the population. The Qing emperors were skilled rulers who adopted many Chinese customs and institutions, including the Confucian system of government, to rule their vast empire effectively. They were also great patrons of the arts and learning, sponsoring huge projects to compile and preserve classical Chinese texts, which helped solidify their legitimacy as rulers in the eyes of the Chinese people. However, by the late 18th century, the Qing dynasty began to face serious challenges from both within and without. Internally, the huge population growth put a strain on land and resources, leading to poverty and social unrest. Government corruption also became a serious problem. Externally, European powers, led by Great Britain, were becoming more aggressive in their desire to trade with China. The British wanted to sell their goods, especially opium, to the Chinese to balance the trade for Chinese tea and silk. When the Qing government tried to stop the illegal opium trade, it led to the Opium Wars. China's defeat in these wars was a huge shock and marked the beginning of what is known as the Century of Humiliation. The defeat in the Opium Wars forced China to sign unequal treaties, give up territory like Hong Kong to Britain, and open its ports to foreign trade and influence. Over the next several decades, China suffered from more internal rebellions, such as the massive Taiping Rebellion, and further defeats at the hands of foreign powers, including Japan. The Qing government tried to reform its military and administration in a movement called the Self-Strengthening Movement. But it was too little, too late. The combination of internal decay and external pressure proved to be too much. The dynasty's inability to modernize and defend the nation led to growing calls for revolution. The final collapse of the Qing dynasty came in 1911 with a revolution that ended more than 2,000 years of imperial rule in China. In 1912, the Republic of China was established, with Sun Yat-sen as its first provisional president. However, the new republic was weak and fragmented. The country soon fell into the hands of regional warlords who fought one another for power. This was a time of great turmoil, but also of new ideas. The May 4th movement of 1919 saw students and intellectuals calling for China to embrace science and democracy, and to throw off old traditions and foreign domination, sparking a new sense of Chinese nationalism. The decades that followed were incredibly difficult for China. The country was torn apart by a long civil war between the ruling Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the rising Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong. This internal conflict was brutally interrupted by the full-scale invasion of China by Japan in 1937, which began World War II in Asia. The two Chinese parties formed a temporary and uneasy alliance to fight the Japanese invaders. After Japan's defeat in 1945, the Civil War resumed. In 1949, the Communists emerged victorious, and Mao Zedong stood in Beijing's Tiananmen Square to announce the founding of the People's Republic of China. The nationalists fled to the island of Taiwan. Under Mao's leadership, China underwent radical changes. The government took control of all land and businesses, attempting to transform China into a socialist society. Programs like the Great Leap Forward in the late 1950s and the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and 70s were intended to speed up this transformation, but resulted in widespread economic disaster, famine, and social chaos, causing immense suffering for millions. After Mao's death in 1976, a new leader, Deng Xiaoping, came to power. He introduced a series of bold economic reforms, opening China up to foreign trade and investment and allowing for private businesses. This new policy was called socialism with Chinese characteristics. These reforms unleashed an economic miracle. Over the past 4 decades, China has experienced one of the most rapid economic transformations in human history, lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and becoming a global economic powerhouse. Today, on August 15, 2025, China stands as a major player on the world stage, a leader in technology, manufacturing, and international affairs. Its long and epic journey, from the legendary Yellow Emperor through glorious dynasties, periods of turmoil and revolutionary change, has shaped its unique identity. The deep roots of its ancient civilization continue to influence its culture, its society, and its vision for the future, proving that the story of China is a continuous river flowing from a distant past into a powerful present.